Hi guys, this is A1 Stereo Control, which is a free stereo imaging plugin from Alex Hilton, and it allows you to visualize and control how wide your sounds are. I've created this demo track and it has piano in it, but before we hear the sounds, let's talk about the interface. So I love the fact that this plugin is actually resizable, which is quite uncommon for a free plugin, so that's really nice. You also get an actual picture here, so that when you pan, or when you change the stereo width, you can actually see what's going on, and that's a really cool way to learn the basics of pan and stereo width. There's another thing I like, which is that you can change the color scheme. So that's also fairly uncommon for a free plugin, so I do like that. But let's get into the functionality. So first of all, we have the input. Now notice that if you change this, you can reset it by double clicking on it. And another cool function is that you can actually double click on the value itself and input your own values, and we can do that with the rest of the numeric values as well, which is nice. So you've got your left and right channels for the input. You can mute the entire plugin. You can swap the left and right channels, flip the phase, make everything in mono. And it's quite nice that this mono button is actually visualized on the screen here. So the mono button has the same effect as if we turn the stereo width to 0%, but it's just a cool way to actually turn that on and off, and we can see what effect the plugin is actually adding by widening our stereo image. I'm going to skip over these buttons just now, but we will come back to them. So we're currently in easy mode, where you just have the pan to change the direction of the sound and the stereo width to show how wide it is. Then you can also save your presets here and load them up later on. So the save bass button allows us to mono frequencies beneath a certain threshold, and once again you can type in that threshold, and this is a useful function because you might want particular frequencies to always be mono, especially in your bass. You don't necessarily want those pinging from left to right. So to make your track feel more solid, you would generally want to mono those bass frequencies. And one thing I should probably mention is that, as you've probably noticed, when you hover over one of these knobs or buttons, it has this tooltip at the bottom to describe what exactly the button does, and that's actually really useful. I really like that, and it's quite uncommon to see that in plugins today, so it's almost like you don't need a user guide because it kind of explains itself. So that's really handy. You can also mute the mids so that you can hear only the sides, and again you can mute the sides so we hear only the middle, and that's actually a really nice function. So for example, you might want to send your instrument, like my piano, to two different channels. One of the channels would be mid only, one of the channels would be side only, and I could process those two at different times. And where that becomes useful is if you've got lots of competing frequencies in the middle, you could actually have those frequencies EQ'd out of your middle signal, and you could leave them in the sides, so you're creating less muddiness in the middle and you're improving the clarity of your track. So that's an example of where you might want to use that. Again, you've got the output and you've got your left and right, and you can bypass the entire plugin. So that's the basic functionalities of A1 Stereo Control. Now let's talk about the expert modes, because if you look at other videos, and I've tried to watch other videos about this plugin, there are very few of them, if any, that actually go into the expert mode settings, and I think that's partly because in the official documentation it doesn't really say a lot about these. So even though it gives you a text description of what they are, it's still kind of not intuitive to understand what they do. So I've tried to figure this out for myself by playing around with them, and I'm going to share those explanations with you just now. So first of all, let's talk about the pan curves. This is just how much of an effect the pan knob actually has on the real life pan. So let's compare linear and logarithmic, for example. I'll pull up a graph of this. Even though your pan knob might be in one particular position, you can see that the actual pan effect of linear is about twice as intense at this point than logarithmic. So the time when I see this becoming useful is if you're actually sweeping through the pan. For example, you're moving your pan from left to right and so on, and you want it to be a bit more subtle when the pan knob is at lower values, and you want it to be steeper when it's at higher values. So it's all about the intensity of the pan. And to be honest, I actually don't ever use this knob because it's quite hard for me to hear the effect of this. I'm quite happy to just leave it on linear. And also, I don't tend to automate the pan. I would tend to find a space for an instrument and just leave it there. So I would pretty much never touch this, but maybe you can find some use for it, and I would say just experiment to see what's going on. So let's talk about the pan law next. This describes how much the mids are reduced relative to the extreme sides. So to put this in plain English, 0 dB means that you're getting less sound from the sides. 6 dB means you're getting more sound from the sides. So let's confirm this by, let's pan hard in one direction. And if we mute the mids, then we can listen to the effect it has on this side. So let's play this. So you can hear that with the minus 6 dB slope, it's actually louder on the sides than it is with the 0 dB. So that's the effect that that has. Again, it's not something I really play about with very much. I'm happy to just leave it at 0 all the time. So let's move on to the stereo controls, the fix mid-level. That is quite an interesting one, and we'll illustrate that by setting this. So what this means is that your mid-level is always going to remain the same. Let's listen to the mids on their own by muting the sides, and if we alter the stereo width, then we can see what happens to the volume. So you can hear there's no change in volume there. Let's contrast that with the bind mid-side levels. So you can hear there's an obvious difference there, and if you want your signal to still have some sound down the middle, I would say use the fixed mid level, whereas if you want your sound to be predominantly from the sides, I would choose bind MS level. This is a useful function because you're actually going to be able to remove things from the middle or keep things in the middle, and it depends on what you want to achieve. Do you want your sound to be in the middle? Or do you have a muddy mix in the middle and you want to remove them and have them just at the sides? So that's quite a useful function actually. Finally, we move to dual pan and balance. So this is a bit trickier to understand, and I've opened this tool Ozone Imager to help us visualize the sound in more detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a small stereo width, and I'm going to pan to one side. So on dual pan mode, this is going to be quite a focused sound. It's going to focus all the noise in this specific direction, whereas on balance mode, some of the noise is actually still going to come from the right, but it's just going to be at a much lower volume. Let's keep an eye on the Ozone Imager and see this effect in practice. So with the dual pan mode on, the noise is much more focused in a specific area, and it has this sort of small cone that it's aiming at. In balance mode, we can see that it's a much wider area. Let's just take a look at that again, but I'll do it with a smaller stereo width. So you can see that the dual pan would be useful for focusing your sound in a very specific direction, whereas balance just gives you a little bit more width. So that's A1 stereo control. Thanks very much.